Everyone shut up. Thank you, Jesus. Let's begin. Before the world knew Jeffrey Epstein as the disgraced financier, his social circle already included some of the most powerful men in America like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. But how does a college dropout with no clear source of wealth become the go-to financier for presidents, princes, and billionaires? You might be asking yourself,
Wait, how does a college dropout with no clear source of wealth become the go-to financier for all those people?
this, my friends, is the story of Jeffrey Epstein. Let's begin. Jeffrey Edward Epstein wasn't born into privilege. In fact, his beginnings were surprisingly ordinary. Born in Brooklyn on January 20th, 1953, he grew up in a modest household, attending public schools like any regular kid. His parents weren't wealthy, his neighborhood wasn't elite, and nothing about his early life suggested he would one day wield influence over some of the most powerful people on earth. But here's where things get interesting. Despite never completing his college degree at Cooper Union or New York University, Epstein somehow landed a teaching position at Manhattan's elite Dalton School in the mid-1970s. And you might think teaching math to rich kids was just a stepping stone, but Epstein was playing a much deeper game. While at Dalton, he wasn't just educating students, he was studying their parents. He was mapping the social networks of New York's financial elite, learning their habits, their weaknesses, their desires. The prestigious private school became his laboratory for understanding how power and privilege operated at the highest levels of American society. But his teaching career came to an abrupt end in 1976 when he was dismissed from Dalton. The official reason? His behavior had become problematic. Little did anyone know that decades later, investigators would circle back to examine exactly what that problematic behavior entailed. Some reports suggest his interactions with students and their families raised red flags that wouldn't be fully understood until his criminal enterprise was exposed. Epstein's next move was a bigger leap. Despite having no formal financial training, no MBA, and no traditional Wall Street credentials, he somehow secured a position at Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most prestigious investment banks. Within just a few years, by 1980, he had climbed the ranks to become a limited partner. But how does someone with such an unconventional background rise so quickly in one of the most exclusive and competitive industries in the world? How did a college dropout with no financial background become a billionaire managing money for the world's richest people? The answer lies in a relationship that would define Epstein's entire empire and provide the foundation for his unimaginable wealth. In 1981, he left Bear Stearns to start his own consultancy, International Assets Group. This wasn't just another investment firm. It operated in complete secrecy, with no public clients, no transparent business model, and no clear explanation of how it generated returns. Soon after launching his mysterious consultancy, Epstein met Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands, which owned Victoria's Secret among other retail giants. But Wexner didn't just become Epstein's client, he granted him unprecedented and almost incomprehensible power over his personal finances and trust assets. We're talking about billions of dollars placed under the control of a man with no formal financial credentials.
Wait, Professor, why is that, kind of suspicious, no?
And that's exactly what I'm saying. Through this relationship, Epstein gained access to luxuries that most people can only dream of. He acquired the largest private home in Manhattan, a massive Upper East Side mansion worth tens of millions. He purchased a sprawling estate in Palm Beach, Florida, complete with private beaches and elaborate gardens. There was an apartment in Paris, a ranch in New Mexico, and most infamously, 2 private islands in the U.S. Virgin Islands. But here's what's truly shocking, however. Epstein claimed to only work with billionaires, boasting that he wouldn't even consider managing money for anyone worth less than $1 billion. Yet, Wexner was his only publicly known client. So where did his massive wealth really come from? How did he afford multiple private jets, a staff of dozens, and a lifestyle that rivaled royalty? Well, Epstein himself provided some clues, though they only deepened the mystery. He claimed to operate as a bounty hunter who tracked down stolen fortunes for ultra-wealthy clients who had been defrauded or cheated. This work, he suggested, involved traveling to exotic locations, dealing with dangerous criminals, and recovering assets that traditional investigators couldn't touch. But some investigators believe his real business wasn't finance at all. It was information, specifically compromising information about the world's most powerful people. The theory suggests that Epstein's wealth came not from investment returns or bounty hunting, but from a much darker source, blackmail, and the facilitation of illicit activities among the global elite. This theory gains credibility when you examine Epstein's social strategy. He didn't just accumulate wealth, he systematically cultivated relationships with influential people across politics, business, science, and entertainment. His approach was methodical and calculated, designed to place him at the center of multiple power networks simultaneously. With his mysterious fortune secured, Epstein began assembling what would become the infrastructure for his criminal enterprise. Little St. James, his 72-acre Caribbean paradise, became the crown jewel of this operation. This secluded retreat, accessible only by private boat or aircraft, provided the perfect setting for activities that required absolute privacy and security. But this wasn't just a luxury vacation spot for the wealthy. Survivors' accounts paint a horrifying picture of very horrible stuff that I cannot say on here, but we can call them cupcakes if you will. They were brought to the island under various pretenses such as modeling opportunities, educational programs, or simply the promise of easy money. The recruitment system was sophisticated and predatory. These cupcakes were often sourced from vulnerable communities across South America, Eastern Europe, and former Soviet countries. Modeling agencies, particularly MC2 run by Jean-Luc Brunel, were allegedly used as fronts to identify and traffic potential victims to Epstein. The operation had a transactional element that made it particularly insidious. Each cupcake was paid for their encounters and given bonuses for bringing in others, creating a pyramid scheme of abuse. In one particularly disturbing case that emerged during legal proceedings, very young cupcakes were reportedly brought to Little St. James for Epstein's birthday celebration. This detail, buried in court documents, illustrates the depths of depravity that characterized his operation and the complete disregard for the welfare of children. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of Epstein's story isn't just what he did, it's who he knew. His contact list and flight logs read like a who's who of global power, spanning multiple decades and including individuals from across the political spectrum and every major industry. The list includes former President Bill Clinton, who appeared in multiple flight logs and court documents. Clinton has denied knowing about Epstein's crimes, but their relationship clearly extended beyond casual acquaintance. Donald Trump, before and during his presidency, was also linked through social events and mentions in legal documents, though the extent of their relationship remains a subject of debate. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, became one of the most prominent figures associated with Epstein's circle. He's been directly accused of inappropriate behavior by Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most vocal survivors, allegations which he has consistently denied. His association with Epstein and Maxwell cost him his royal duties and severely damaged the British monarchy's reputation. The entertainment industry was well represented in Epstein's network. Kevin Spacey appeared in flight logs, as did Michael Jackson, whose name surfaced in contact lists, though no allegations of criminal conduct have emerged. David Copperfield, the famous magician, appeared in both contacts and court documents, though again without direct accusations of wrongdoing. The international dimension of Epstein's connections was equally impressive. Ehud Barak, former Israeli prime minister, was among his associates, as were various European politicians and business leaders. This global reach suggests that Epstein's operation wasn't confined to American shores, but had international implications and possibly international financing. At the center of this web was British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime companion and alleged chief recruiter. Her role wasn't passive. According to survivor testimony and court documents, she actively identified, groomed, and delivered young victims to Epstein and potentially to others in his network. Her 2021 conviction on federal charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy provided some measure of justice, but also raised more questions about the extent of the operation and who else might have been involved. Maxwell's conviction was significant not just for the justice it provided to survivors, but for what it revealed about the systematic nature of Epstein's crimes. This wasn't the work of a lone predator, it was an organized criminal enterprise with multiple participants and sophisticated methods of operation. The first major attempt to bring Epstein to justice should have ended his criminal career permanently. In 2005, a Palm Beach mother contacted police about Epstein's abuse of her daughter, triggering what should have been a straightforward investigation. What followed was an 11-month investigation that uncovered a systematic pattern of abuse involving dozens of victims. Police documented multiple cases, gathered physical evidence, and built what seemed like an airtight case against Epstein. The evidence was overwhelming with victim testimony, corroborating witnesses, physical evidence, and a clear pattern of criminal behavior. But then came one of the most controversial and outrageous plea deals in American legal history. Despite mountains of evidence showing systematic abuse, then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta negotiated a deal that allowed Epstein to plead guilty to just 2 state charges. Let's pause for a moment to understand the magnitude of this betrayal of justice. Federal prosecutors had evidence of crimes that could have resulted in life imprisonment. They had identified at least 36 victims eligible for restitution, with investigative journalists later documenting more than 80 potential victims. The FBI had built a comprehensive case that could have dismantled Epstein's entire operation. Instead, Epstein received a sentence that was almost incomprehensibly lenient, A mere 13 months in county jail, much of it on daily work release where he could leave for 12 hours a day to go to his office. During this imprisonment, he continued to conduct business, meet with associates, and maintain his lifestyle. It was less like a criminal sentence and more like a minor inconvenience. But the most outrageous aspect of this deal wasn't just a light sentence, it was the immunity granted to potential co-conspirators. The agreement specifically protected unnamed individuals who might have participated in Epstein's crimes, effectively ensuring that no one else would be held accountable regardless of what evidence might emerge. The deal also required the sealing of all records, preventing the public from understanding the full scope of the crimes or the identity of those who might have been involved. This secrecy clause meant that survivors couldn't speak publicly about their experiences and that journalists couldn't investigate the broader implications of the case.
That doesn't make sense, Professor. What kind of power or leverage did Epstein have that allowed him to escape serious consequences for crimes that would have destroyed anyone else?
Well, the answer might lie in what investigators discovered during searches of his properties after his 2019 arrest. Hidden throughout Epstein's homes were sophisticated surveillance systems, cameras concealed in bedrooms, living areas, and private spaces where his guests would never expect to be recorded. This wasn't just about satisfying Epstein's voyeuristic tendencies or creating personal trophies of his crimes. Former victims and staff members have testified that these recording systems were comprehensive and that Epstein was obsessive about documenting what happened in his properties. Think about the implications of this surveillance system. For decades, some of the world's most powerful people visited Epstein's homes. Presidents, princes, CEOs, celebrities, and politicians all spent time in spaces where their every move and conversation might have been recorded without their knowledge. This created a potential insurance policy unlike anything in recorded history, a collection of videos, audio recordings, and photographs that could destroy careers, topple governments, and ruin lives if ever released. It was a blackmailer's dream and possibly the real source of Epstein's power and wealth. This was deliberate infrastructure designed to capture compromising material on influential people. Some investigators believe this was Epstein's real business model, not investment management or bounty hunting, but the systematic collection of blackmail material on the global elite. This theory would explain many of the mysteries surrounding Epstein's case. It would explain his remarkable wealth despite having no visible legitimate income source. It would explain why powerful people continued to associate with him even when rumors about his behavior were widespread. And most importantly, it would explain how he was able to negotiate such a favorable plea deal in 2008. For over a decade after his initial conviction, it seemed like Epstein had successfully buried his crimes and moved on with his life. He continued to travel internationally, maintain his properties, and cultivate relationships with influential people. The 2008 plea deal had effectively immunized him from further prosecution and allowed him to present himself as someone who had made mistakes but paid his debt to society. But investigative journalist Julie Brown of the Miami Herald refused to let the story die. Her relentless reporting in 2018, combined with mounting civil suits by survivors who had never given up their fight for justice, rekindled federal interest in the case and exposed the true scope of Acosta's betrayal of justice. She tracked down survivors who had been silenced by the original plea deal, uncovered documents that had been sealed from public view, and exposed the connections between Epstein's case and broader patterns of prosecutorial corruption and privilege. The public outcry following Brown's reporting was immediate and intense. Alex Acosta, who had become Secretary of Labor in the Trump administration, was forced to resign when his role in the plea deal became public knowledge. On July 6, 2019, federal agents finally did what should have been done more than a decade earlier. They arrested Jeffrey Epstein at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey as he returned from Paris on his private jet. This time, the charges were serious and comprehensive trafficking in New York and Florida, with the potential for additional charges as the investigation continued. Legal experts predicted that his trial would be the most significant criminal proceeding in decades, with the potential to expose a network of corruption and abuse that reached the highest levels of American and international power. Survivors and their advocates prepared for what they hoped would finally be a reckoning for decades of injustice. But Jeffrey Epstein would never face trial, and the truth about his network would never be fully exposed in a courtroom. On August 10th, 2019, at approximately 6:30 a.m., Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. Prison officials discovered his body hanging. The official cause of death was ruled suicide by hanging, ending any possibility of a trial that might have exposed his co-conspirators. But was he murdered to prevent him from exposing the secrets of the world's most powerful people?
Oh my goodness, did they silence him?
The circumstances surrounding his death were so suspicious that even the most skeptical observers began to question the official narrative. Let's examine the facts that have made this case one of the most controversial deaths in modern American history. First, the surveillance systems that should have been monitoring Epstein around the clock mysteriously malfunctioned on the night of his death. The cameras positioned outside his cell, which were supposed to provide continuous coverage, experienced technical difficulties that resulted in no usable footage of the hours leading up to his death. Second, the guards who were supposed to check on Epstein every 30 minutes were allegedly asleep at their posts and hadn't conducted proper rounds for hours. Third, Epstein's cellmate had been transferred just hours before his death, leaving him alone in his cell despite protocols that typically prevent high-risk prisoners from being isolated. This transfer was reportedly done without following standard procedures and without clear justification. Fourth, critical surveillance footage from other areas of the prison went missing or was corrupted, preventing investigators from establishing a complete timeline of events on the night of Epstein's death. In a federal facility with redundant security systems, the failure of multiple recording devices simultaneously defied statistical probability. Autopsy results only added to the controversy. Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's family, disputed the official suicide ruling. He noted that the fractures in Epstein's neck were more consistent with homicidal strangulation than with suicide by hanging, particularly given Epstein's age and the circumstances of his death. Perhaps most troubling of all, Epstein had been removed from suicide watch just days before his death, despite having allegedly attempted suicide just weeks earlier. The decision to remove someone from suicide watch typically requires extensive evaluation and approval from multiple levels of prison management. Why was this protection removed when Epstein was facing the most serious charges of his life? The timing of his death was also remarkable in its convenience for those who might have been implicated by his testimony. Just days before his death, court documents had been unsealed that contained explosive allegations about prominent figures in his network. More revelations were expected as the case proceeded to trial. Federal investigations into Epstein's death have been conducted, but many questions remain unanswered. The official conclusion of suicide has never fully addressed the security failures, the missing evidence, or the suspicious circumstances that surrounded his final hours. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn that might surprise you and challenge many of the conspiracy theories that have swirled around this case. While theories abound about Epstein servicing a network of powerful predators, leading survivors' attorneys have revealed something different about the true nature of his operation. According to those who have studied the case most closely and worked directly with survivors, the evidence suggests that while Epstein's circle included famous figures, most of his abuse was for his personal gratification, not to service his guests or associates. The vast majority of the celebrities, politicians, and business leaders in his orbit appear to have been unwitting participants in his social networking strategy, not co-conspirators in his crimes. This doesn't diminish the horror of what happened to his victims, nor does it excuse those who may have witnessed suspicious behavior and failed to report it. But it does suggest that Epstein's real power came not from running a service for other predators, but from his ability to position himself as an indispensable connector of influential people. This revelation is important because it helps separate fact from speculation in a case that has generated countless conspiracy theories. While some individuals in Epstein's network may have participated in criminal activity, the evidence doesn't support the theory that he was running a systematic operation to compromise powerful people for blackmail purposes. Because as always, guys, it's just a theory at the end of the day. But the story doesn't end with Epstein's death. If anything, it was just the beginning of a new chapter focused on accountability, transparency, and justice for survivors. The so-called Epstein files, thousands of pages of court documents, flight logs, contact lists, and investigation records have been slowly released over the years since his death, each batch revealing new details about the scope of his operation. These files contain transcripts of interviews with alleged victims and witnesses, many of which are redacted to protect the privacy of survivors and witnesses. Flight logs and address books list high-profile visitors, contacts, and associates from around the world, turning those associations into permanent sources of public scrutiny and suspicion. Video and audio recordings seized during searches of Epstein's properties include law enforcement interviews, body cam footage, and surveillance material, though much of the most potentially explosive content remains sealed or heavily redacted. The jail surveillance from the night of Epstein's death continues to be a source of public skepticism due to the missing footage and technical failures. In 2025, Congress released tens of thousands of pages from Justice Department files, related to the Epstein case, though much remains redacted and the release has only intensified calls for greater transparency. The ongoing debate in political circles about whether to release Epstein's complete client list has become a lightning rod for accusations of cover-ups and protection of powerful interests. Congressional hearings, media investigations, and ongoing legal proceedings ensure that the Epstein case remains in the public consciousness and continues to generate pressure for reforms and revelations. The fact that so many questions remain unanswered years after his death demonstrates the complexity of his network and the extent to which powerful interests remain invested in maintaining secrecy. So here we are, years after Jeffrey Epstein's death, still grappling with the implications of his story and still seeking answers to fundamental questions about how someone with such obvious red flags was able to operate with impunity for so long. But perhaps the most important question isn't about what we've learned, it's about what we're going to do with that knowledge. What do you think? Was Epstein's death really suicide, or was it something more sinister? And what does his story tell us about the systems of power that still govern our world today? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Also, I see you're not subscribed, so maybe drop a sub, but again guys, it's all just a theory. I love you all, and yeah man, stay safe.